Hello, my name is Lynn, and I'm a doctoral student at the Department of Criminal Justice. Have you ever used the phrase, "it's against the law"? And I ask this because I've come to realize that people in some countries don't get to say the same. And one of those countries is Myanmar, which is where I'm from. And today I'll be talking about what is happening there in the context of law and society as part of this presentation titled Law as an Instrument of Military Oppression, a Case of Myanmar in 2021. I'll begin with some background on Myanmar, then I'll continue with the current study, after which I will conclude with theoretical and policy implications. Myanmar is a Southeast Asian country bordering China, Laos, Thailand, Bangladesh, and India. It is an economically poor country and has been listed as one of the 35 poorest countries in the world. Myanmar's ethnic makeup is predominantly Burmese. The dominant religion is Buddhism, followed by Christianity, Muslim, animism, and Hindu. As for politics, the country has spent most of its modern history under one of the most stable and long-lived military dictatorships in the world. After gaining independence from British colonial rule in 1948, it embarked on a shaky democratic journey which abruptly came to an end in 1962. And since then, Myanmar has experienced three major political uprisings, one in 1988, then in 2007, and then the most recent one in 2021. All calling for the abolishment of the military dictatorship altogether and a transfer of power over to a civilian-led government. And why might this be? Theories of dictatorship indicate single individual rule over every aspect of the country. Repression is a key characteristic, with massive government intervention into the economic and social lives of citizens. Such extensive interventions have been thought to be motivated by the desire to maintain control of and order among the public, so that dictators can continue staying in power and reaping the benefits of political and economic monopoly. Competition, especially political competition, is not encouraged and is usually oppressed. The current study examines why Myanmar has been under such an oppressive system for nearly 60 years. An examination of what has happened after the coup on February 1st, 2021, suggests that the answer might be in the laws. Research has argued that authoritarian regimes utilize law for two main purposes: to ensure the stability of the rule and to predict the actions of their opposition and oppress them if needed. Literature has described laws to serve two main functions, symbolic and instrumental. The symbolic role of law is to make statements, as opposed to its function of controlling behavior. It is usually contrasted to its instrumental role, that is, how the law seeks to directly control behavior. To better understand the function law serves in Myanmar, the study formulated three research questions. Firstly, a new concern in 2021, compared to 1962, 1988, or even 2007, was social media and the increased connectivity it brings with it. With intensifying unrest on the streets, people turn to their social media accounts to organize activities like silent strikes and humanist protests. So we wanted to see if the regime took actions to suppress and punish online political mobilization. The second question asks if there are new laws and measures to suppress the new waves of political opposition. And we ask this because in the past, protests used to be led by identifiable leaders. But the 2021 movements are considered leaderless, so we wanted to see what laws and measures the regime issued to deal with such a new approach. Finally, are criminal sanctions directed at the wider variety of activities different from existing ones? Because the majority of the public are already involved in these activities, and to deter even more people from engaging in similar activities, the study hypothesized that the new sanctions would be harsher and swifter. As for data, in the red square are some example keywords that we used. Google was the main search engine. Reports and articles from various international media outlets were reviewed. Published laws and analysis of laws were collected from three main online databases. Documented cases of individuals that have been subjected to these laws were collected from reports of human rights organizations, local media outlets that usually do not receive international attention, and different social media platforms. Documents that were only available in the Myanmar language was translated for use in this study. Our key finding was that, yes, new laws have in fact been issued. 2 weeks after the coup was announced, the Privacy Amendment Law was issued and cancelled all the rights to telecommunications privacy people had. This law gives government personnel the power to stop civilians in the streets, demand that they unlock their phones for a look-through, and indefinitely detain them if authorities find content in their phones that indicate involvement in or support for anti-government movements. Another new law is the counterterrorism law, which criminalizes contact with terrorist groups identified by the regime. People can be sentenced to 3 to 7 years in prison if they showed any kind of support for formerly elected civilian officials, international organizations that represent the overthrown civilian government, or vigilante groups fighting against the regime. The penal code has also been amended following the coup. The first was the addition of Section 505A. Section 505A criminalizes people for comments that cause fear or for spreading false news. Celebrities and influencers have been mainly targeted, as seen on the right, in the list of people charged with 505A along with their Facebook profiles and links to it. The Second Amendment is Section 124C. This law mainly targets the civil disobedience movement. CDM is a passive resistance which involves the refusal to obey a government using non-violent measures of opposition. Common strategies include labor resistance, defying unjust laws, mass protests, tax disobedience, and bank runs. The punishment, if charged with 124C, is 6 to 20 years. The Third Amendment is Section 124D, and under this law, anyone hindering a government employee from effectively carrying out their duties can be sentenced to a maximum of 7 years in prison. Of the two pictures on the right, the one on the top was taken during the first protests of 2021, and people were attaching roses as signs of peace offerings to the police. At the bottom is a more active and hostile interaction between the two. And because of the vagueness of Section 124D, the regime can charge and punish civilians in both these scenarios for hindering the police from their protest suppression duties. Finally, there is martial law. These two orders were issued on March 15th of 2021. The first substituted civilian leaders of certain counties with military leadership, giving the military extra coverage in monitoring the people. The second is directed at protesters in that if they are arrested, they will face military tribunal. Military courts are notorious for conducting trials behind closed doors, and anyone tried in these courts will certainly be convicted and do not have the right to appeal. Typical punishments are death, imprisonment with hard labor for unlimited years, or the highest punishment designated for the crime in existing law. Finally, are the criminal sanctions applied to the wider variety of activities harsher and swifter? And yes, because since the coup, we have been seeing increased reports of search and seizures, warrantless arrests, civilians facing military courts which swiftly convict them, and protesters being sentenced to harsher punishments. This case study offers an insight into the complexity of law, that law is a double-edged sword and can be used as an instrument by an elite class such as the military in suppressing the oppressed. The instrumental value of law cannot be underestimated, especially within an illegitimate military regime. More specifically, this study addresses how laws promulgated in 2021 were adapted to meet the changing socio-political situation in Myanmar. While some of the legal stipulations used common terminologies like defamation and inciting violence and insurrection against the government, actions taken as part of these laws, such as banning press freedom, social media censorship, and mass incarceration, clearly contradict internationally held values. Finally, this study calls for non-governmental organizations and the international community to commit further research and resources towards bettering the currently suboptimal human rights situation in Myanmar and other countries like it. And with that, I conclude my presentation and direct any questions you may have to the email address listed at the bottom of the slide.